When we think of tropical rainforests, we think of something ancient. Huge trees dominate the landscape with a delicate balance of a plethora of biodiversity of plant species, invertebrates and vertebrate species. Although many rainforest areas have remained relatively the same for millions of years, like parts of the Amazon, forests in the Congo Basin of Africa, and rainforest parts in the Malaysian Peninsula, many forest areas are far less old than we think. In many ways, these forests tell a story of hope and resilience. I say this because conservationists and ecologists like me have a tendency to describe removal of ancient forests as final, gone forever. We remove it and it will never come back, which subsequently creates a counter-narrative. Well, now these pieces are gone, stop worrying about it. As you said, it's final. Here I want to give an example of an important forest block that is actually not that old. Actually, it concerns the largest tropical forest block north of the Amazon, the Selva Maya. This large forest block represents regrowth after the collapse of Mayan civilization. The Mayans formed a highly advanced and intricate civilization between the year 250 and the 9th century, building large cities reaching population sizes between 7 to 11 million people. One of the most famous cities in the heart of the Selva Maya is Tikal, with its temple complexes towering over the high forest canopy. Everyone seeing these impressive monuments of this ancient civilization will naturally assume that these old monuments are surrounded by ancient forest. The two go together, but the truth seems very different. Analyses of the soil layers and plant remains indicate that the area was almost completely deforested at the time of the Mayan collapse, with highest amounts of deforestation in the Yucatan and the lowlands of the Petén. Tikal and the other sites like Caracol and Belize looked very different in their heydays, with few trees around. One of the things we have to remember about the Mayans is that they lacked domestic livestock. Their only domesticated animal consisted of dogs, with some evidence of limited domestication of some of the wild species like ocellated turkey and peccaries. Bovines were lacking completely. It is thus that controlled agriculture solely consisted of growing crops, mainly corn, as other crops from Eurasia like wheat and rice were not available yet. Mayans seem to rely for a considerable portion of their protein on hunting. Put high hunting pressure with the intensive need for monocrops of corn, and we have the perfect modern scenario of a conservation disaster. This intensification eventually became their downfall. The trigger of the Mayan civilization collapse has been assigned to agricultural overproduction, with the growing urban centers requiring more and more food. While crop cultivation was sophisticated, with intricate irrigation systems, the Mayan landscape is not very fertile to begin with, having a limited layer of topsoil. Next to this, they lacked a good source of fertilizer from domestic animals, which would allow the replenishing and redistribution of nutrients on the land. They could only rely on slash-and-burn agriculture and a rotation system, which in the end could not cope with the increased demand. The result was lower and lower crop yields, ending in a civilization and population collapse. If you would imagine an ancient Mayan ecologist, conservationist, 50 to 100 years before the collapse, this person would likely start to worry about dwindling wildlife populations in the region, alongside the lower crop yields. They must have noted that game species were more difficult to find and hunt, while the revered jaguar was noted less and less. Around the 9th century, with food production collapsing and no additional trading networks, allowing the purchase of food from further afield, a means that sustained Rome, for example, during the days of the Roman Empire. The remaining Mayans had to leave their urban areas, and revert back to smaller scale farming for individual production. This collapse must have come with considerable starvation and population decline, with urban specialists, originally non-food producers, having to fend for themselves. Human tragedy with lessons to be learned for modern society. However, the collapse of the society did not come with the collapse of an ecosystem. The highly depleted and fragmented forests must have seen shifts in plant population and even human-caused extinctions among the flora and fauna. But we have to note that there was enough diversity left within this landscape to allow the evolution of a biodiverse rainforest to grow back, taking over the abandoned landscape. Instead of ruins standing in an open agricultural landscape, the ruins of the Mayan civilization eventually stood in tall rainforest, with jaguars, howler monkeys, tapirs, peccaries roaming the forest in large numbers. It does not seem that the Mayan collapse went together with the disappearance of any of the megafauna of species present during those days. In Mayan time, the main environmental threat came from within the heartland of the thriving Mayan civilization. The forests to the south of their civilizations were still pure wilderness and sparsely populated, and the Mayans would have known about these areas in what is currently southern Honduras, Nicaragua, and Costa Rica. In the 20th century, the situation is reversed. The Mayan forests of Mexico, Guatemala, and Belize are one of the last wild conglomerates of tropical forests north of the Amazon, within a sea of development within the rest of Central America. These regrown Mayan forests are now the last remnants of wilderness in this northern tropical region, while at the peak of the Mayan collapse, this area was part of an ecological disaster. Although of course a tragedy in terms of humanitarian loss, I do find the story of the Mayan forests one of hope, in which nature shows its resilience, building back beautiful wilderness after an initial ecological collapse. The Mayan forests first of all tell us nature can take a bump and regrowth and recuperation can happen. However, nature can only be pushed so far and can only rebuild if there's still wilderness nearby, providing the seeds for reforestation, while the animals will follow once the vegetation has reached the stage they can live there again. However, in these modern times, these Mayan forests are the last isolated block of wilderness in these northern regions, surrounded by more urbanization than ever seen in history. I therefore see the story of the Mayan collapse as a story of hope, tragedy, caution, and warning.